thank you all for coming and joining us here in this incredible space that Georgetown is graciously letting us use today for our celebration of the open web, which is kind of like a library, right? My name is Leela Bailey. I am Senior Policy Counsel at the Internet Archive, and sometime earlier this spring, I had a chat with Josh Levine at FAI, and I was like, is it possible for us to throw a party for the open web somewhere in DC? And they were like, yeah, I think we can make that happen. And here we are. This is beyond my personal wildest dreams, and I know Brewster Kahle is also thrilled to be here. So I'm going to get out of the way really quickly. I just wanted to give our heartfelt thanks to the Foundation for American Innovation and Luke Hogg and Evan and Josh and the whole team here that has been really, really wonderful in helping us pull this event off. And I'm going to hand it over to Luke, who I can't see, but who I think can hear me just fine.
I can hear you just
great.
fine, Leela.
Okay, wonderful.
Well, thank you again for all being here. A couple minor little logistical things. We've been asked to ask everybody, please don't climb in the stacks. That was the one thing. After this event, we will have the reception. We will have the bars open. There will be food flowing, wine flowing. So we hope you'll continue and enjoy this space and enjoy being with friends. And when Leela approached, I think she downplayed it a little bit. When Leela originally approached us and said, which she buried the lead, the primary reason that we are doing this here today is that this year, correct me if I'm wrong, Brewster, the Internet Archive has already surpassed 1 trillion web pages archived. 1 trillion. Which I did some rough math, or rather, I'll break my own rule. I had the AI do a little math for me. Is approximately 100 times the amount of content that is in the Library of Congress today. So that's a massive achievement. It's something that we wanted to celebrate, but we also wanted to recognize that we are in a period of change. We are in a period where the open web is changing. The open web is, in many instances, under attack. And so we were very excited to, one, be able to partner with the Internet Archive and the Massive Data Institute in order to host this event, but also to have such wonderful panelists and have a wonderful conversation. And so I learned long ago that people can introduce themselves far better than I can introduce them. So I think we're going to start by going down the line. Just introduce yourself, give us your name, a little bit about your background, and I'm also going to challenge you with a fun question, which is, what was your first memory of interfacing with a computer? What was the computer and what were you doing?
So, that'll be interesting.
Brewster?
I'm Brewster Kahle, founder and digital librarian of the Internet Archive. And it was switches. It was a row of switches and a row of lights that my friend had wire wrapped together. So I'm that old. It was before microcomputers.
That's it?
That's
okay. Well, I'm Vint Cerf. I've been around for a while, and I was very much involved in the development of the ARPANET and the subsequent Internet. I'm now Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist at Google and just celebrated my 20th anniversary there. The first two computers that I ran into, the first one is a Sage computer, semi-automated ground environment that was used in the 1950s to capture radar data coming from distant early warning radars in the northern part of Canada to distinguish between flights of Russian bombers and Canadian geese. And as far as I can tell, the Canadian geese have done more damage than the Russian bombers ever have. The second computer that I got to program was called a Bendix G15. It was a numerical controlled paper tape-based machine. Bendix also made washing machines and other things, but Steve Crocker, my best friend, and still my best friend, and I programmed that machine to do various mathematical computations in around 1960. It was at UCLA, and we were still in high school at the time. And over to you.
Hi, my name is Cindy Cohn. I'm the Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Proud lawyers to the Internet Archive. Hopefully they never ever need us again, but I'm not betting on it. And old friends, EFF and Archive are it's a love relationship. I think the first computer, now I'm not sure what kind of computer it was, but I programmed on punch cards when I was in junior high in Iowa in the early 1980s. So we were a little early 1980. Yeah, well, we were a little behind the times in Newton, Iowa, but I'm sure there's computers there now.
John?
I'm John Stokes. I'm one of the founders of Ars Technica. We started that in, I guess, '98. So, early weblog that kind of got out of hand. Most recently, I've done a couple of things. Most recently, I'm in an AI startup. So I broke the rule of not mentioning AI. It's AI for enterprise newsrooms.
He wins the booby prize. We talked about this earlier.
I do. I win the prize. Yeah. So it's AI for enterprise newsrooms and corp comms and that kind of thing. My first computer would have probably been a Tandy TRS-80.
Oh, Trash 80.
Yeah, Trash 80.
Yeah, we all know those.
Put many hours of Oregon Trail, a lot of dysentery.
Yep.
And then I got a hand-me-down computer from my uncle. It was a Commodore 128, and that's what I learned to program on. So I wrote some games and learned to do the joystick input and all that kind of stuff. So that was my beginning of my journey.
I'm especially glad that Vint brought up the Sage system because I was just down in Palo Alto and had the pleasure of visiting the Computer History Museum where they have some of the Sage systems.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't know, before the mouse, the Sage system used essentially a gun,
They
LED
were called light guns.
A light gun?
And they would capture the flying dot would be picked up by the light gun as it got to a certain point on the screen. Yeah.
But it also has it has two of the world's four remaining IBM 1404, 1401 computers that use the punch cards and they do demonstrations. So shameless plug, if you're ever in Palo Alto, go and check that out. But I want to jump straight into the conversation, primarily for Vint and John, but I want this to be as much of a conversation as possible. So, Cindy, if you disagree with Vint, we'd like to know that. Looking back at the internet's kind of formative decades, there were a lot of decisions that were made, some about architecture, some about governance. And I don't think that anybody realized that at the time that the impact of those decisions would be such an unexpectedly generative system of the internet. So thinking back on that time, those formative decades, which of those decisions, whether they're architectural or governance, do you think were the most important to preserve openness and scale as money eventually ended up pouring into the web?
So let me try to address this in two different directions. One is the institutional side, and the other is the architectural side. Keep in mind that the internet was developed on the shoulders of the ARPANET project, which preceded it. And one of the guys who was most critical to the host level use of the ARPANET was Steve Crocker, a very close friend of mine. He and I programmed the Bendix G15 when we were still in high school, so we've been friends for over 60 years now. Steve led the network working group, and that effort led to the RFC series, the Request for Comment series, which goes on today. There are over 9,000 of them, maybe is 10,000 by now. But he also introduced a level of humility into the system and a range of collaborativeness, this sort of humble, let everyone have a chance to say something and do something. And good ideas would filter to the top. So we benefited in the internet space from his leadership and experience in the ARPANET. This is not to leave out the people at Bolt, Beranek, and Newman that built the actual packet switches, the so-called interface message processors. But Steve, I think, introduced this very collaborative element into the system. what was called the Network Working Group, today you would recognize as the Internet Engineering Task Force and the Internet Architecture Board. The other thing I would say about the architecture is that it was, we inherited from the ARPANET the notion of a layered architecture where different functionality took place at different layers with well-defined interfaces that were relatively stable. And the stability of the interfaces was really important. As long as you maintain the stable interfaces above and below a given layer, you could do whatever the hell you wanted to do in the middle, as long as you didn't mess up the interfaces. So we had lots of latitude to experiment with ways in which a particular layer would be implemented. At the physical layer, for example, we didn't start with optical fiber because it didn't exist. We were using dedicated telephone circuits, for example. But when optical fiber came along at layer 0, we just swept it into the architecture and plunked IP packets down on top of them. So that architecture gave us a lot of flexibility. The other thing that was important is you could add a layer if you wanted to, or you could extend a layer if you wanted to, and nobody minded. You didn't mess anyone else up, you just had yet another option. So Tim Berners-Lee benefited from that by adding the HTTP layer on top of TCP/IP and now on top of QUIC as well. So this extendable architecture in both directions has been very important, I think, to the continued evolution of the internet and its invitation to add new functionality in several different directions. Looking on the institutional side, I would argue that we created institutions when their need became apparent. So this was not a top-down kind of thing as much as it was, holy moly, we better do something. So John Postel, for example, inherited from Steve Crocker the responsibility for editing the RFC series and for keeping track of IP addresses and domain names that were assigned to various parties to manage. And he started out just doing the whole thing himself. Then he added a couple of people to get some help. And then it became apparent that this thing was scaling and we needed more institutional structure. Eventually that led to the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which oversees the allocation of IP addresses and domain names, as well as parameters of the various protocols of the ARPANET and the Internet. Of course, that led to more scaling, and that led to the regional Internet registries, which allocate IP addresses in different segments of the globe. And I can't resist telling you that the interplanetary extension of the Internet, which is well underway, also needs to allocate address space. In particular, we're looking at IPv6 for use across the solar system, because that's got a lot of space in it, no pun intended. And so the result is that even that extension is starting to take advantage of structures that were created for the terrestrial internet. I love that phrase, terrestrial internet, because the implication is there's an extraterrestrial one. So we kept creating institutions as needed, and I think that is still true. Look at the Internet Governance Forum, which comes out of the World Summit on the Information Society in 2005. It's now getting examined in the World Summit Plus 20 at the UN, which will be decided whether we continue with WSIS and whether we continue with IGF in December. That's a member state decision. That's the UN member states decide whether or not we'll continue those activities. So all of this translates into a striking openness, which I will, the North Star in this system is everything should be able to connect to everything else. There is no other more important North Star than that. And although that also has risk, because if everything can connect to everything, then harmful activity could hit you on the side. But this idea that we didn't know at the time what needed to talk to each other, and we still don't know because people keep creating more and more things that can be part of the internet environment that we might need to communicate with. So that openness is really vital to the utility of the internet. One last point on this topic, it's economic. When I talk to smaller countries, let's take New Zealand, 6 million people and 20 million sheep. And the question is, what does the internet have for them? And the answer is, well, you can certainly use it domestically to do all kinds of things, including providing government services to the population. But you can also reach the world's economy if the internet is open. And so you can create an economic benefit for the country, which is vastly bigger than the country's economy, if you can serve a population outside to the rest of the world. So openness and connectivity are really important. And the countries that are pushing hard for digital sovereignty and want to kind of build boundaries around the internet may not understand that the golden goose is the connectivity, and if they kill that, they're going to have a problem.
Well, John, I want to bring you in here. Having written on and followed this industry for so long, I mean, what do you think about what Vint just said and some of these ideas of openness? What are some of the things, what are some of the decisions that you've seen play out over the years that maybe didn't work quite as well as we thought that it was going to, in terms of preserving openness as scale increased? And what are some of those decisions that you think were very crucial and have served us well over time?
Hint, he's implying, why didn't people pick up IPv6 faster?
It's hard for me to speak to decisions because I wasn't in the room back in the day. So I kind of came to this story, like I said, in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I started covering this and doing internet, like really serious internet things in the Napster era, right? So, so everybody remembers Napster. And to us at the time, and this is something I think a lot about recently, because a lot of the web has become so centralized with the walled garden stuff. And there was a kind of, I think, an alternate path that we could have taken that was kind of the peer-to-peer revolution, where everyone can, host their own files and do their own connectivity. And we sort of didn't do that, right? And there were a lot of reasons that this didn't happen. And the two reasons that I spent the most time on at ours and in my career were probably kind of incumbent interest in copyright. Large copyright holders were very threatened by peer-to-peer, and rightly so. And then also telecoms, the structure of cable and phone, and then later wireless. And they also were not super friendly to, like, I'm just going to host my own files on my laptop and serve them across the globe, and you don't have any control. And so I think I kind of have been half formulating a thesis that it feels a little bit like in the 90s, when this stuff came along, we were kind of at the low point of this concept of industrial policy that's being reintroduced now, right? I mean, that wasn't like, it was kind of a dirty word, kind of the Clinton White House and also across the aisle. And now we're thinking a lot about industrial policy and AI and in microprocessors and stuff like this. And there's a willingness to, you can just do things, right, as the catchphrase. But back then we didn't. I guess that wasn't as much of a tool in the toolbox. And I kind of wish that there had been good faith and like productive industrial policy around protecting peer-to-peer, around pushing for some kind of openness, because I think we would have had an alternate evolution, not just in terms of network architecture, but in terms of user experience. I think there could have been a way. I mean, we have a lot of computing resources on the client. Those got hogged by adware and overly large bloated web pages. And so when you're running Chrome, and this has been true for a long time, you run a lot of code in the browser. You run more code than what we used to run for really complicated servers. And so there could have been, I think, an alternate set of user interface paradigms and just computing experiences that were around peer-to-peer, where people kind of offered things to each other in a peer-to-peer manner. But instead, these kind of large kind of gravitational forces of copyright, telecom concentration, stuff like this, I think pushed us in a really centralized direction that squashed that alternate path and left us with the kind of large platforms.
Vint, real quick.
Yeah, I wanted to make an observation about this. Of course, I was a huge peer-to-peer fan because that's how our thinking started that way. We didn't know what needed to communicate with what else, and so we said everybody should have access. Of course, you didn't have to answer the call. You could hang up if you didn't like it and so on. There is a scaling issue, though, that shows up. At 8 billion users, just to pick a number, if everybody decided to go to your server in your basement or something, that kind of might be overwhelming. And so what has happened is that the scale at which the service has to be offered has led to the creation of large data centers. And so some of this is just forced on us by the scale of the operation and the efficiency of building large-scale data centers instead of large numbers of small ones. The other thing that forced us into this space is that when the V4 address space was starting to run out, we introduced this network address translation hack, which was very clever, but it created a client-server arrangement instead of a peer-to-peer arrangement. V6 allows peer-to-peer, but it would still have the potential hazard of the scaling. So there are lots of imponderables here that would need to be considered.
Yeah, Brewster, I want to come to you in just a second, but I'm going to go a little bit out of order here because I think that John brought up some really interesting questions and comments about this peer-to-peer era, because there's an architectural and a technical point about why this kind of didn't work out in scale, but there's also a legal and a policy question here. And so I kind of want to come to Cindy in talking about whether it was the crypto wars, Bernstein v. DOJ. There were a lot of these early fights around code being speech that have ended up shaping norms for publishing code, for security research and participation in the open web. Can you just, how does that kind of fit into what John and Vint are saying in terms of, what are some of those critical inflection points that you think that we got right in some of these early fights? And what are some of the misses? What are some of the problems of how we chose to do the policy and some of the legal cases from those early days?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, having been the one who litigated the Bernstein case, I do think code with speech was a right decision. Don't you can quote me on that. But I think it set a floor for how we thought about what people were doing online when they're building tools and when they're sharing code. I mean, especially in the early 90s when we were getting involved. But I still think today there's a robust scientific conversation that takes place in computer languages, in code. And so to not recognize that that's a language, that that's science, right? It's not language or speech. People hear code as speech and they think, like literature and things. But the First Amendment and speech has always included science. It's always included stuff that people can ultimately use, right? Whether that's a recipe or different languages, computer languages are languages, a verified way of explaining to a computer, explain to another person, but also a computer how to do things in order, right? How to break it. That's why recipes are a pretty good mental model. At least that's what I was taught by, Hal Abelson and other people who sat down with a really young but good listener lawyer and explained to her why what was going on the internet a lot of it needed to be protected by the First Amendment and code for sure. So I still think that's right, because I think it's actually just fundamentally right about what people are doing when they're developing code, and it creates this open space, right? It grounds what computer scientists and computer developers are doing in science, which has always been open. It's always been about sharing. We all know that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and so having that grounding, I think, has been helpful. It didn't get us as far as I would like it to get us, and I think that the peer-to-peer conversation is actually where it went wrong, right? We tried to argue in the 1201, in the anti-circumvention questions, that code needed to be starting from a place of speech. And so if somebody was coding something that broke the lock that you put on your copyrighted work, you couldn't just toss that out without doing a serious First Amendment analysis, and the ends and the means have to meet each other very closely. And then when the peer-to-peer file sharing stuff came on, the copyright, we just lost, right? The peer-to-peer file, we lost at the US Supreme Court. There's some ways we're still working around it, but this idea that copyright is more powerful than science won. And I think that's a place that we went terribly wrong. And I totally hear Vint on the, sometimes I get asked, what's the one thing that we did wrong that if we did right, we would fix it? And we didn't get into this place because of one bad decision, so we're not going to get out of it with one answer. It's not the one weird trick that fixes the internet. But I think it is one place where we went wrong. in terms of thinking about how we would have a world of, a continued world of protocols, not platforms, to steal a phrase from Mike Masnick. And so I think that's one that went pretty wrong. And there was whatever, 5 or 6 years in between them. And then from there, of course, copyright has just continued to be like the
nemesis.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we, and I actually don't think, I think we were right in our interpretation of the law of copyright. I actually think that the Supreme Court had to make up a whole new doctrine in order, because we were right, the secondary copyright liability. I might be getting too legal here, but we were right that copyright law would have had plenty of space for peer-to-peer file sharing if it was interpreted correctly. But we were not successful at that. There was this whole other doctrine called inducement that came in, and other kinds of things, which ultimately some of that stuff caught the archive recently. Where I think we've taken copyright law and we've put it a very maximalist interpretation of copyright law, and made that one of the most important laws of the internet. And that was something that was warned about by Professor Pam Samuelson and Mitch Kapor in the early 90s, that you had to, and John Perry Barlow, two who were founders of EFF, that if we weren't careful, that if you just read copyright law on its face, it would become the one rule that rules the internet. And I fear that it's going to be the one rule that rules the internet and that kills libraries. Sorry, I just got really dark.
This is the perfect.
I'm sorry, but I think you just identified a T-shirt that I'm going to propose.
Yes,
and the T-shirt says, "Science thrives on the First Amendment."
Nice.
I've never heard anybody say it that way before, and you did. I like that a lot. Sorry for the interruption.
We've been talking a lot about copyright, but I think that Cindy gets first rights on the trademark for that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Okay.
So
Check.
y'all can negotiate that.
CC license.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, much better. Yes.
And it is funny also that John brings up this idea of that it's become this new phrase that is thrown around, like you can just do things, right? And in some senses, when I'm talking to friends, it feels like they think that this is like a new idea, that they think that like the idea that you can just do things and you can just build things is new. But I think, Brewster, you really truly prove the point that this is not a new idea. And so I think my question for you, based on kind of this conversation so far, has been, I think the Wayback Machine was originally designed with an eye towards preventing link rot, right? Like that was one of the first big swings that was taken at that. So what are the lessons that you've learned from 2 decades of archiving about some of the incentive structures that tilts the web towards openness versus closedness? Because I think Cindy just talked about copyright, we're happy to make this a whole, we can just talk about copyright. But what are some of those other incentive structures that you've seen, whether they be policy or technical, over the years?
Well, I think we should just take a positive moment, just for a minute, of just how much sharing is embodied in 1 trillion web pages from 1 billion people that want to go and share what they know to anybody that wants to learn from them. So what I draw out of that is people are awesome. People basically over the last 30 years have poured their lives into the open sphere if they're allowed to. Corporations and the copyright problems and the monopoly structures that were, okay, not so good. Government's having some troubles. But people want to share if we allow them to. And basically what's gone on is we haven't allowed them to. So I just went walking around this, the first floor, I didn't climb up, and trying to find out, do we have these books on the internet anywhere? And the answer is no. So we, a bunch of us, sold a vision of turn to your screen to answer questions. It was the library of the net, right? That was going to be what we offered. The Memex, the Xanadu, the hypertext, all of that stuff. We were going to make it so that the library was easier to use. And what's happened is people have shared, and they've worked really hard to get around the copyright restrictions so that they could share, right? You have academic authors going and saying, okay, we're going to put it in this archive with an X to make sure before it goes into the publishers and nobody ever gets to see it again, we're going to go and work really hard to make it available. And we've now raised a generation, and everybody under the age of 40 has been raised on what they've read on screens, pretty much, based on this promise that you could turn to your screens to answer questions. But what's not on those screens? The published works. The published works are not available. Or if they are, it's only to people that have a subscription in there in Yale, and they can go through the gateway of that, and then they can go and they can see it. That's not what kids learn from. They learn what's available for free. And available, and in Google. And we didn't adapt. One of my favorite phrases by the editor of Current Affairs, he put as his title of his article, "The truth is paywalled and the lies are free."
Wow.
And I would say, actually, it even goes further than that. The truth isn't even online. We have failed. We've failed a generation. If we're confused about why people are unclear whether the Holocaust happened, we should look at ourselves and go and say, well, we didn't let the 20th century literature, the published literature, go online. Anytime we got close to it, we were sued.
Yeah.
It was not allowed to go online. So there's a lot online, and people are awesome. I'm going to still stick with that. But this idea of are we standing on the shoulders of giants?
Or stepping on their toes.
I would say the younger generation is not. They cannot get access to the literature or the history. They're just not allowed. Ask anybody that's 20, 25 years old, or ask academics just sort of what's going on in their fields and how well is our information ecosystem going? And it's bad. So I think we have some challenges ahead of us. Yes, there's 1 trillion pages. Great. A lot of that came about, to answer your question a little bit on the governance and the like, is what the others have been saying. It was by having it so that there was no gateway to participating. Everybody could participate, and they didn't feel they're being taken advantage of. You could make a blog called Ars Technica, right? You could go and make it so that you have an even playing field that you just plug in and you can make it go as long as you're paying attention to the law. Great, that bloomed. When we go and make these constrictions, things go wrong. And just to dial back into the history, in '76, the Copyright Act made it, they flipped it so that things became default copyrighted.
Yes.
And the first wheel that came off the cart, as best I could tell, was software. So I was working at MIT. We were coding a new operating system, the list machine operating system. People didn't even sign their code. That was thought of as arrogant. We were sharing, we were making something together, and then MIT said, well, if everything's owned by somebody, this must be owned by me. And they went and they sold it to Symbolics, this company. Oh, and we, the ones that were still at MIT, tried very hard to keep up with this proprietary fork that was made only possible because of the copyright change.
I have to ask, was Symbolics.com the first registration in .com?
I think so.
I think that's right, because I got an email from the guy saying that this morning. Wow, okay.
Yep.
Anyway.
So Symbolics went and forked and privatized and containerized a community project.
Wow.
And it killed it. And Richard Stallman worked very hard to try to go and keep up. And we couldn't keep up. And so he said, okay, we're going to lose the list machine operating system because of this lossage of law. And so let's go back and fix the structure. And he invented free and open source software. And said, okay, let's go back to a joke operating system called Unix. Okay, it is a joke operating system. Unix, as in Unix, right? It's an operating system that can't. Anyway, so it's
got no balls,
and said,
right.
okay, we'll have to build a new world with the right governance structure, which is free and open source software, on top of a joke operating system. And now we have a joke operating system that's everywhere because it got the governance right. And it was to try to pull back, as Lessig puts it, only some rights reserved, because we overdid copyright. And then we just massively, it now lasts 100 years, everything's copyright, and there's statutory damages problems that for anything at the scale of libraries is catastrophic. A friend's company, nonprofit, has been sued by a large copyright holder for running DNS, the domain name service. What? And is sued for 10 to the 27th dollars. That's more than the number of particles in the universe. And that's what happens when you have these perverse laws controlled by the wrong people. And we didn't evolve some things correctly, and we're suffering. We're suffering social discord. We're suffering a generation that doesn't have as good a library as what we grew up with.
Wow.
It's tragic. We need to fix it. And we can. People are awesome. And people want to share. They want to learn. They want to grow. Let's let them.
I love ending with the optimism there.
Yes, that's good.
I also just wanted to note that Brewster just said that there was a time when it was considered arrogant to not sign your code. Like
arrogant
to
to
sign
Oh, it was
your
arrogant
code.
to sign it.
To sign your code because you're taking too much credit for all the other people's work that's going to be in that file.
But continuing on this thread of copyright, Cindy, I want to come back to you. That there have been a bunch of recent rulings. There is a lot of current litigation around various aspects of copyright. But the one that I want to talk to you about specifically is controlled digital lending. Mm-hmm. Are there viable paths for libraries to be able to preserve and lend in a platform-dominated ecosystem? Like, have we just, I appreciate Brewster's optimism. Coming in with a little bit of pessimism, like, is it all over? Like, have we just kind of crushed that dream from a legal standpoint?
I mean, the decision was a mistake. It was wrong. Laws get things wrong and then we correct them. I mean, I think that Congress could correct this really easily by just extending the library exception. I mean, I would like to see more than this. But there is one clear trick that could fix the controlled digital lending thing is let digital works be in libraries in the same way that physical works can be in libraries. That's what controlled digital lending is trying to do. Brewster and his friends and Leela had to try to create something that basically maps on to what copyright law, what Congress has already let libraries do. And I don't think the judge had to rule that way. I think the archive presented a pretty good, I mean, obviously, I wasn't the lawyer who did this, so I can we presented a pretty good argument for why not. But I understand why the judge said, look, this statute that Congress written should include you, whether it should include you or not, I can't read it to include you, and so it can't. And again, I don't know that they needed it. I think there was a fair use argument. There's other sorts of things. But that would fix this problem, right? And it's not hard. It's like 3 words. Like, it is not hard. It's about political will and being willing for the many of us who are awesome to stop the stranglehold that the one industry has on this. And, it's a ridiculous thing, right? I mean, because this industry doesn't just have a stranglehold on the Internet Archive, it has a stranglehold on our tax dollars, right? Because all the local libraries all across the country paying these huge licensing fees to get stuff that they should be able to get by buying something once and offering it to 1 million people. Instead, they're licensing, and it's metered, and it's controlled, and they're stuck with whatever it pays. So ultimately, the joke's on us, right? We're the ones who are paying for this ridiculous system that is, letting the content industry sell us over and over and over again, even in library contexts, even in where people can't afford it contexts, our culture. And there's so many other ways you could do this that would make sure that artists get paid. That's really important. You do want to incentivize people for making works without this monstrosity.
Could you just clarify something for me? When in the history of libraries, if we go back far enough, is it the case that they just bought whatever was available to everybody else, put it in the library, and then repeatedly loaned it to whoever wanted it? Is that, or did they always
Brewster,
have
you
to pay?
probably know this
Yeah,
better
yeah.
than me.
Libraries have been around longer than publishing,
have to
certainly
be.
longer than copyright. Right. And basically, they would buy things, preserve them,
Yes.
lend them,
Yes.
and interoperate with other libraries.
Right.
That's what libraries do. In the digital world, we're now told that libraries are not allowed to buy things. Nope, not allowed. Zero. You're not allowed to own anything. You're not allowed to preserve anything. You're not allowed to lend anything, and you're not allowed to interop with other libraries. So the basic four functions of libraries have been declared we're not allowed to do these. And whether we're digital libraries, this is so what we want is to be able to do what we always did in the physical world, but in the digital world. So if you go and get a copy, you can't go and just give it to everybody, but you lend it to one person at a time. And what libraries in the United States are about a $20 billion a year industry. It's about a third to a quarter of that goes to publishers' products. But in the digital world, they don't end up with anything. They just end up with kind of an access to a Netflix of books. And so those books and journal articles and web pages now, they're all these, even the Reddits of the world are starting to go and call themselves publishers and go and take what they got for free from users and control it more and more and more tightly. And they can change things one place, one time, and it's changed forever for everybody. That's not a good way to run a culture where you can't have access to your history.
Another question, if you don't mind. Let's think about Netflix. You mentioned it. Netflix says rent or buy. What are the implications of buying a Netflix thing?
You can't buy it. You don't own it.
Well, that was back when they would send you
the DVD?
Amazon, I think you can download stuff and then you own it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that it's all the factors of ownership, but...
Getting us back on
digital ownership.
On the rails just a little bit.
I'm sorry, but the one other anecdote seems very relevant here. Many of you probably know this story where it must have been Amazon that provided a book on Kindle that they didn't have the licensing for, and then they reached out and pulled it back. It was sort of like breaking into your house and pulling a book off the library shelf, which kind of shocked us all. And of course, it was 1984, which made it even more cool.
Yeah, nobody ran that past the PR department, apparently. And I do think it is worth noting that we are seeing a resurgence of use of some of these legal tools like Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Reddit just recently sued an AI company under this law, not making any opinions about that particular piece of legislation, but the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is also kind of coming up more and more recently. And so I do want to take us in a slightly more optimistic kind of direction here, because this has been a lot of doom and gloom, and I think there's a lot of doom and gloom that is necessary right now. But I want to come to you, John, because as a publisher and a technologist and a content creator for a long time, do you think that there are places where the open web still beats the walled gardens that we've created, where the open web still remains king in terms of the ability for people to create and to have their creation appreciated and in some instances monetized? Are we still, where are those places where we can see those glimmers of hope in the open web for content creators?
I'm so sorry that you asked for optimism. That's very regrettable. I really, everything comes down to distribution and publishing. And if you are on the open web and you're publishing on the open web, then you need someone to link you. You know, back in the ancient days, we had this thing called the homepage, right? Who remembers the homepage? And you wanted to be the homepage. That was a kind of a way that you, in a homepage was, you know, something like Slashdot or something like this, where you would get distribution from the homepage. You would go to the homepage first, and you would see other things that you could kind of click on. You could kind of make your way around the web. And so a homepage was kind of like a little small like hub, and it was a hub and spoke model. And so it was a place, you know, that distribution happened. And so now, of course, it's the feed. The feed has been replaced. The feed has replaced the homepage, and the feed is, of course, pay to play. If you are somebody that's a creator and you're trying to get your work in front of people, and you're not on a platform like TikTok, or you're not on you know, Threads or Twitter, you're not on one of the, if you're on the open web, then you kind of have to pay to play to be in the feed. So I think it's really tough right now. I think if I'm glad that I can still register a domain name and do a startup. I would say that that's the main thing that you can do, is if you have a good idea, if you have some code, now you can vibe code, right? So you can still get a domain name, you can still do a startup, and you can still get some virality. I mean, we all have now heard about Cluely.com and some of these other kind of crazy startups, just because they were very clever about their marketing. So that would be the bright spot.
For anyone that doesn't know, vibe coding is the new thing where you basically use the AI to help you code, and you tell the AI what you want to do, and it's very effective. I can attest to that. But I kind of want to move this conversation a little bit into kind of forward-looking and forward-thinking. If you will all be kind to me, I think we have 3 more quick questions, one of which is going to be a lightning question, then we're going to open it up for audience Q&A. So Brewster, I think I want to come back to this idea. You know, the Wayback Machine is approaching, or has already achieved, I think when I wrote these questions it had not achieved it yet, 1 trillion web pages archived. Thinking for the next trillion web pages, or let's say 10 trillion web pages. Let's go Moore's law on this, the Internet Archive. You know, what do you think, policy-wise or technology-wise, would most help research and journalists to verify and to archive these web pages at scale in the future? What is the one thing that you don't have right now that you would want to have to get to that 10 trillion web pages?
Decentralization. Let's have a game with many winners. Let's have a system where people can participate and share freely without feeling like they're being taken advantage of, so that we don't feel like they're getting crunched. So the key thing is to incentivize people to create and share openly as possible. Some people will get paid. An awful lot of those 1 trillion were never paid. And that's fine out there. Let's go and have all of this work. So the piece that I think that we're really, to be able to keep going on this curve, is we need to make it so that it's a level playing field, I guess would be the way to put it, or a system that, like decentralized systems such as the internet, they're hard to make work. They're difficult. They're more difficult than making one place that everybody has to come and they're gated into that particular environment. So that requires government help. That requires corporations not basically doing everything they can to, what is that billionaire who said competition is for losers?
You'll have to be more specific.
So why don't we go back to actually having competition? Why don't we actually sell things? If we actually were good enough to sell digital files, right? MP3s were sold for a while before then it all became Spotify again. And now it's all kind of choked. So let's go back to some of the basic things of selling things. A market. And so you're not a license, so that the feudal system was when you never owned anything. Let's go through an enlightenment. I think there's some positive things here we could do.
And for the other 3 of you, it's a slightly different question since you do not run the Wayback Machine. if we're sitting here and we're trying to greenfield the next web, some people call it like Web 3.0, the open web, the next 10 years of, whether you want to go for the AI superintelligence route or the AI is totally a bubble route, I don't care. What is one default that you think that we should bake in to the system? Whether that can be policy, that can be legal, that can be technical, to essentially align openness with safety. Because this is one of those things that, regularly Apple is a consistent thorn in our side at FAI, because they like to claim that safety and security are the reason that we need to allow for all these walled gardens. So what are some of those things that we can do today, either technically or from a policy standpoint, that you think should be standardized in order to make sure that we can avoid the kind of regulatory and market capture that we have seen, that we are currently living under? What do you got, Vint?
Yeah, well,
No, you look ready. So.
I'm sitting here thinking about scaling again. I mean, imagine that you start out the way we did start out, where you had highly distributed computers all over the place. And people put up web pages eventually in the 1990s. People got access to them, but as more and more demand is placed on getting access to the content, now an individual might not be in a position to scale up their service capability, even if the telcos didn't inhibit that in the first place. So I worry a lot about how to marry the distribution argument with the scaling argument and figure out what's the business model that supports the scale. And I don't have a good answer to you right now for that, because the work example is what has happened, which is growth of a smaller number of very big companies that are in a position to invest heavily in infrastructure in order to support all the demand. So I don't have a magic wand here to solve that problem.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a magic wand either, but I do think there's some fundamentals, right, that we could get back to. Like, we could get back to actual competition policy and enforcing antitrust law, and actually, we took on the railroads when they were too big. I wouldn't say that was perfect, but at least we did some stuff, right? We've got these giant companies that I think there's pretty good arguments around, if we actually were serious about competition law, that could help to bring things back, so that there aren't just a couple of big players who, I'm kind of pro-billionaire this week because one made a call to our president and now my city's not invaded, but I'm not sure that's the right way to run a country. But I'm just not sure that's the way that we should go. So I think we could start with some competition law. I'd like to see privacy law and security accountability to deal with the problems that you're in. Apple shouldn't be able to just lie and think, there are some safety things that come if you've got, the prince watching after your fields, but maybe that's the feudal system isn't the best way to get us real safety. I don't want to just have to pledge my allegiance to one or the other, to Apple or Google. So I think that, an actual privacy law, I'm going to be the lawyer here, private right of action, actual accountability for people hurt when there are security breaches and stuff, rather than having to hope that you've got an AG or an FTC that can do something, empowering all the rest of us to actually enforce our own rights would be really great. And then I think, we already talked about this interoperability, portability, the availability to vote with your feet if a service that you're using isn't serving you, and go somewhere else. So what does that mean? That means you have to be able to leave. You have to be able to take your stuff with you. It ought to be your stuff to begin with. And there needs to be another place to go. It sounds like it's really complicated, but honestly, it's like the town square in my hometown, right? That's all. I'm just recreating that. So, where are their punch cards? I guess Iowa's here.
Yeah, I like the others. I don't have a silver bullet. I think of two things. The one is to piggyback on what Brewster and Vint have raised. I said in my first answer, industrial policy, because of this issue, I've been thinking about how hard decentralization is. I mean, we've seen this in crypto. Whatever you think of crypto, a lot of it just doesn't work very well. And it's part of it is fundamental to the space. Decentralization is really hard. It needs a lot of support. And we're naturally going to centralize. Centralization is the easier thing. And so I think government support for like real decentralization, research, technology development, that kind of thing would be great. The other piece of it that I think has been missing from the beginning is there's kind of an identity layer that we never really cracked. I mean, we started early on using the credit card as a proxy for identity, right? And that's another flavor of centralization. I don't think that is, I don't know that downstream of that, the effects have been great. And now we're in the teeth of another identity crisis with AI slop. You know, I mean, this is this very, very hard problem on the web. Is like, who is even human? It's not just, you know, who is trying to defraud me, but who is actually a person, who is a bot. And so we missed the identity piece somewhere in the very early beginning, and it keeps coming back to bite us. And I don't have a good, you know, kill shot answer. It's not like, unless I was going to do crypto fixes this or something like that. But, you know, nobody wants to hear that. But like I said, nobody wants to hear that. But at any rate, that is where I would look. I would look at industrial policy to support decentralization, and I would look at trying to do something to improve the identity situation.
So there might be a tiny step that would be helpful. You know, we've created these various cloud service systems, and there are 3 or 4 really big ones. They don't necessarily interoperate with each other. That's one place where a lot of people would benefit from having enough standards so that you could freely move information from one cloud to another. The charging structures vary, and that might inhibit the ease of moving data from one place to another. But I think that may turn out to be an important theme for the cloud companies to focus on, because people don't like being trapped in one place. They like the flexibility and opportunity to use whatever special features different clouds might have. So I think inter-cloud, whatever that turns out to mean, might turn out to be an important theme.
Let me.
I was going to say, Brewster, I'm going to give you the last word here.
I'm going to try. So you said, okay, the Internet Archive and archiving the World Wide Web. A lot of people have probably here used the Wayback machine, but it was a kludge. It was a kludge on top of a very simple system, the web. The web operated unlike, well, Waze, which lost, but it was a more complicated system of how to support publishing on the net. Mm-hmm. Publishers typically, or historically, had sold things to people and to libraries. And the publisher always goes away, but or they move on to the next thing and they want to do the next issue or whatever. But then it lives in libraries and people's collections, except on the web. On the web, you publish one place and it exists in an URL. That's it. And that's the only place to get it. And when they want to go away or they change it or whatever, which happens, average life of a web page is 100 days before it's changed or deleted. So I thought, oh my God, we're starting to really build on this system that was very simple, and said, okay, at least let's archive it and make the Wayback machine to go and fix this bug. Because if you change it in one place, it's changed for everybody forever, and that's the wrong answer. So the Wayback machine was a solution to a problem that shouldn't have existed. But it's turned out to be really, really popular. And we're about the 200th most popular website. So people want old stuff. Yeah. It's a database that has 1 trillion web pages, but the total number of URLs in it is about 3.7 trillion. And it's a database that's queried at about 6,000 to 8,000 times a second. And that you can do that on commodity hardware is kind of amazing. So that the computer guys have done a lot to be able to make it so that our ecosystem works anyway, despite ourselves. But I don't think the Internet Archive nor the World Wide Web would have happened without a real concerted collaboration between .edu, .com, .gov, .org, all working together in their sectors to go and make something great happen, which is kind of the Internet, the World Wide Web that we basically grown up on.
Well, the Wayback Machine is only one of the amazing things that you guys do. So try and find Brewster after this and ask him or Leela or anybody else about all the other wonderful things. And I will say, it is truly amazing to go to San Francisco and to go to your, do you call it an office? Your sanctuary?
The archive.
The archive. And see the hardware that all of this is running off.
You can come see our lights blink.
Yes.
You can actually
Yes,
walk up and
exactly.
touch the actual primary copy that's serving the world, which is kind of fun.
It's beautiful. I would like you all to thank our panelists for coming. We're now going to pivot to a little bit of a Q&A session. We did run long a little bit with the conversation, but I had to take the opportunity to speak with 4 of my heroes, quite frankly. And so I think we're going to run to audience Q&A now, if that's all right.
And there are microphones.
Shot right up, right over here.
Microphones are coming. I love this. It's like passing a hot dog in the baseball game.
Hi, my name is Reem. I'm from London. I was wondering if you could speak to intellectual property as a concept. Do you think that intellectual property rights are a legitimate right in the same way that other property rights are? And what specific legislative or legal changes would you make to copyright legislation in the United States? Thank you.
I will note it's in the Constitution, so that's a piece of it. But
There is. I mean, I do have to say that I got asked this recently, like, what's your least favorite metaphor? And I think intellectual property is one of my least favorite metaphors because it makes you think that it's about property, and you know it's not. It's something else. And so copyright's in the Constitution. I don't think intellectual property is, but I might be misremembering. But in any event, I think that. I just think that we've identified a couple of the things. I think that copyright requiring registration rather than born protected would be an interesting change, and that I'd love to think through. I think statutory damages are a terrible mistake because, again, you can't do anything at scale with copyrighted works, even if it's a fair use, because it's just a bet we're all very lucky that Brewster has been willing to undertake some of these fights, but not very many people are in the position that Brewster's in to be able to take on some of these fights. And so I think, as grateful as I am for the Internet Archive, I think of all the other public open web ideas that never made it out because they ran into this thicket. I got a lot of ideas about patents as well, but that's a whole other topic. So I think there's a lot of space for reform in the kind of cluster of things that we call intellectual property that would be far more on our side. Again, we speak for the users at EFF. I think artists should be paid. I think inventors should get paid. I think there's so many better ways to do that than trying to create artificial scarcity. Because at the time of the Statute of Anne was written, making copies was hard. And the internet, even before then, but the internet has made copying really easy. And so, we should reflect that because there's so much good that we can all get out of copying being easy. And so tying the business model in this particular way, even though it's in the Constitution, I don't think makes a lot of sense anymore. Because technology has changed and the underlying underpinnings of why we tied stuff to copying I don't think it works anymore.
Just to jump in, a couple of things. First of all, the World Wide Web is a giant copying machine. If you understand how the browsers work, what do? They reach out and they copy a web page. Excuse me for farting in church. The second thing on the copyright registration, I want to double down on exactly what you said. Here's why. If you don't have to register your copyright, then when something becomes lost and you don't know who owns the copyright and you wanted to compensate them, you can't because they're orphaned works and you can't figure it out. If people would just register their stuff, then we could compensate them if we want to. So there's something not quite right about the way copyright's being treated now. The 76 idea sounded good on the surface, but it doesn't work very well for the very people it should benefit.
Brewster?
So we wanted to get at least the national libraries going on this web thing, right? And so I gave a copy to the Library of Congress. It took them 18 months to figure out could they take the copy, and it was like it seemed ridiculous to the time, but it's still going on. So in the Netherlands or in Switzerland, or actually all through Europe, the Swiss said that they are not allowed, the National Library, they don't feel that they can go and archive even just the Swiss web.
Wow.
Not the world's web, just the Swiss web. They're not allowed to do that unless they ask permission. So they asked permission, and over 30 years of active effort, they've gotten 19,000 websites, which sounds great until they calculate they needed 5 million.
Yes.
5 million. And with those 19,000, if you want to see them, you have to go to Bern during the right time of day to go into a room that has a big sign that says no cameras allowed in this room, to go to one computer to be able to see those 19,000 web places.
Wow.
We basically hobbled libraries.
Yep.
We've made it so libraries can't do their job. And their job is really important. So if you think about the Internet Archive, thank you very much for coming. It's awesome, but to the Internet Archive is fantastic. It should be all libraries. We should have a library system that functions, and it really isn't anymore. And we need to fix this soon, or things will even get worse.
Next question.
Yeah.
In 2004, Larry Page was interviewed in Playboy magazine with Sergey Brin, and he was asked about portals, and he said, the difference between Google and these so-called portal sites like Yahoo, Lycos, Ask Jeeves, is that we, quote, want to get people on Google and out into the web as quickly as possible. And that sort of behavior of Google back in 2004 through maybe fast forward a few years, I think it's hard to decouple from the rise of Web 2 and all this long-form user-generated content, blogging, all kinds of kind of cool pluralist sort of arrangement of the web. Today, according to researchers like Rand Fishkin, over 80% of traffic that goes to Google.com either terminates on Google or goes to Google secondary pages. So my question is to you, Dr. Cerf, as Google's chief internet evangelist, how do you sort of kind of reconcile that, we have, with the open web, it seems to be sort of slowly being deoxygenated by this very mechanism. And how do you sort of reconcile that with your advocacy, your sort of pro-open web stance, and when Google itself is sort of engaging in design decisions which cause the web itself to retract, and wonder if you sort of have a response to that kind of premise.
So the question makes it sound like I actually have some authority in the company. You've heard that expression, if you're looking for someone with a little authority, I have as little as anyone.
You have authority by lending Google your name. And
Yes, I understand. I also am not a business guy, and so I recognize that somewhere along the line you have to figure out how to run a business. I would like to see it be possible to make these things more, all of the information more accessible and more readily discoverable. After all, the company got started with this notion of organizing the world's information and making it accessible and useful. And I still think that's an intent. But I can tell that the business models required to make that work don't always, they don't always are compatible with that vision. I'm not the guy responsible for making those business choices, but I am an advocate for openness. And so I'm happy to take back comments like yours and others and articulate them. But I'm not sure that I can have the ability to twist the key and change the result. Nonetheless, just listening to this conversation tells me that we have gone down, I don't mean we, Google, but just generally speaking, we've gone down a path with digital information which is turning out to be less valuable than I think many of us, including me, expected it would be because of its accessibility. When the web first started, it was amazing. It's what Brewster said. People all wanted to just share the information they had. They weren't looking for compensation. So there's something has happened, and maybe it's the expectation of compensation, or the concern that there won't be compensation when your business model depended on it. Think of publishers, I guess, that have gotten in the way of the kind of Encyclopedia Galactica, to borrow Asimov for a moment, that we all are looking for. I know that's not an exact response to your challenge. I am willing to be an advocate of openness wherever I can, but that's probably as much as I'm able to do.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Got one down here at the front.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. My question is, who on this dais would like to be the next Librarian of Congress, since it's open and it controls copyright, and that we need to figure out who the guy who's doing acting, Bob Newland, is real. I work on modernizing in Congress and reform on the information architecture. He's a real reformer. He's somebody who's really willing to do new things. He's out of retirement, just doing this out of his love for the institution and the goodness of his heart. So I'm wondering, who should we start rallying behind for this really critical position, not just for what you're talking about, but for Congress itself?
I'll take that.
Would you do it, Brewster?
I was about to say.
So when I talked to Kahle Hayden, when she just got the position, she said, Brewster, there are 103 million objects in the Library of Congress. Let's just digitize them. And I said, I can help with that. That would be the sort of vision that would make it so that you wouldn't just get your pick of who wants to run it. You would get a NASA program going. You would actually fulfill the dream of the internet that has been around since before the ARPANET. Right, the MEMEX, the vision of building a global brain, of trying to make it so that we are globally smarter. It's the best print library in the world. It is astonishing, its collection. There are people in Cairo, there are people in Delhi that are full-time going and building the collections in the Library of Congress. It is unfreaking believable what the library is. The best collection ever done by humans. Let's have it be used by humans. If you just make that one, it's like, let's go and digitize the Library of Congress, you'll get your pick. Right now, it doesn't look like a real fun job to have.
No, that's an understatement.
One, perhaps 2 more questions, depending on how long the second one.
Hi, I'm an undergrad here, so a lot of everything you're talking about was way before I was born, so this is very, all my notes are things I have to go and look up and read more about, but anyways, do you think the subscription model is an obstacle to the new enlightenment or this marketplace that you have about traditional buying and selling, the subscription model that Amazon Music and Netflix and even New York Times uses? So what's your take on that?
I mean, I think a subscription model has its place. Yeah. And I actually think, especially for stuff that's temporal, like, a newspaper or something like that, where I'm okay if stuff isn't in the public domain or broadly publicly available the minute it comes out. There are certain categories of things where you want that, right? But there are other categories where a subscription model could be fine. The problem is the walls never fall. And they're always in there. And then if whoever has built those walls doesn't support it anymore, the rest of us never have access again. So it's really, I think there's plenty of business models that could work. I would say that if I had one thing to say to Google, maybe get rid of the surveillance business model, because that's a whole other problem that I have. And I think it's caused a lot of other issues, and also a lot of the mistrust that why are people willing to share anymore is because they feel like they're the product. And if we flipped that around a little bit, I think you'd see a lot more people would be more willing to be sharing. But I also have other problems with the business model. But as long as I got Vint Cerf next to me and he's saying he's taking notes back, I got a list. But I think subscription models can be fine. I don't think there should be just one business model on the internet. Ads. I think ad-supported stuff has a real place as well. I don't like creepy surveillance ads. I don't actually think the margin you get off of them is worth the cost to society for them, and that we should play that cost-benefit analysis seriously as a society. But ad-supported, contextual, ad-supported stuff is great. Subscriptions can be great for some things. Others should be good things. But I think at the end of the day, and like the original copyright was very short in time.
Yeah.
I think if we actually brought a temporal thought to a lot of these things, and as a society we said, you can do whatever the business model you want, but it's got to go to the Library of Congress after X period of time, or it's got to go somewhere else.
Public domain.
Either become public domain or easily freely licensed.
May I try on this?
That would I think there's plenty of space for that. It's just that the subscription model is locking up too many things for too long.
Yeah, I think the license model is what we maybe don't want. Subscription, like you're going and getting newspapers on your doorstep, actually that works pretty well.
Yeah.
If you own it at the end of the day, right. But this non-ownership, should we allow basically we had copyright get sort of taken way out of control, yes. And then we add licensing on top of it. So what these companies are looking for is not just copyright, but also license. And Larry Lessig said, why don't you just get one or the other? You can license, and then it's a deal between two players, right? Or you get copyright. But both, something's gone really, really wrong here. And then, yes, Ben Franklin's copyright was 14 years, renewable once.
Yep.
And you had to go and put in a copy to the Library of Congress.
And you also had to pay a license fee to do the second renewal.
Right. I guess it just takes us so much longer to do what Ben Franklin could do in 14 years. But anyway, why do we need 100 years for all of this and growing?
It's a good question.
So
we don't.
Let's build a better internet.
Well, let's build a better internet. No better way to end the conversation. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Internet Archive. Thank you to the Massive Data Institute. Thank you to Georgetown.
Thank you.
The bar's back there. So.
Thank you, Luke.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yes, thank you.